So we are recording, and this is the study guide for quiz 5. And I'm not going to take a lot of time with this because a lot of it's review. But the first thing here is the short run and the long run Phillips curve. And you guys have worked with this before, and so you just need to know what it is, right? Which I have here somewhere. I just had it, looking at it actually. Right here, okay? So, you just basically need to know that it's a curve, it's a model that has the inflation rate on the vertical axis and the unemployment rate on the horizontal axis, and it's just a negative relationship. As the unemployment rate rises, so as we move from right to left here, so as we move this way, we're going to have higher unemployment and lower inflation. So it's just saying that as price levels go up, we see that is a relationship that causes, or let me say that as price levels go up, we see the rate of unemployment go down. So one of the things that we worry about as we get lower and lower unemployment is we worry about inflation, because typically that's what happens as we get down to lower levels of unemployment, we get higher price levels, but not always. Now, and the only other thing is you need to know the difference between the short run of a Phillips curve, which is downward sloping. It has actually, so you're going to get changes in the price levels and the level of employment or the level of unemployment. But the long run Phillips curve is like the long run aggregate supply is vertical, which says that in the long run, price levels are going to adjust so that we come back to the natural level of unemployment, which, depending on who you ask, is somewhere around 4%, is what we call the natural level, which or a full employment. Now, this point right here, by the way, where we call the natural level of unemployment or full employment, is also the point on, or the place on the aggregate supply, if I have it up here, is right here, okay? So when we are at our long run or a potential GDP on the aggregate demand and supply model right here, we're also right here on our Phillips curve at full employment, or the natural level of unemployment. Okay, so I've probably said way too much about that. Okay, now you're going to need to know the different types of employment, and if you go to this website right here, it's and in your book and in the videos and the con videos, it's so, and just so you just need to know the different types of unemployment, and if you know those, then you won't have any problems with any of the questions on the quiz. Okay, let's see. So we want to be able to compute the unemployment rate when you know the total population, total employed, the total unemployed, and the total not in the labor force. So the key right here is the unemployment rate is based on the number of people who are not working who want to work. So it's the percentage of people who aren't working but are considered to be in the labor force actually looking for work, okay? Because it would not make any sense to count children or people who are retired, So we only count in that the workforce. Okay. this one right here, it's important to understand the difference between the price level and what we're calling the expected price level. So for example, if the suppliers, if the producers in the economy expect the price levels in the future to go down, then they're going to, let me think how this works, then they're going to actually supply more into the market because the way to think about this is if the expected price levels are going to go down, you'll get a movement down along the line of the demand curve, and then so the aggregate supply is going to shift to the right. Okay, so when the expected price levels are going to decrease. And the other way to think about that is if the suppliers expect prices to go down, then they're going to want to sell everything off now before the prices drop, and they'll get lower prices for it. So they actually oversupply into the market. So they're going to sell off their inventories while the prices are still high. So this is why this is a little bit confusing, because don't get confused between the price level and the expected price level, because that's what's not happening now, but what everyone expects to happen in the future, which is a little bit different. So just know that when the expected price levels are going to go down, then the aggregate supply is going to shift to the right because if you look at the let me just jump back over here. If you look at the supply curve right here, and let me grab my thing right here what I do with it. I don't know. I'm trying to find my little blue ball here. So if the price levels are going to drop, and they think they're going to drop, then you're going to see a movement along the line here, and then you'll see a shift in the aggregate supply to the right. If the expected price levels are going to increase, then the suppliers will say, oh, okay, let's hold everything because we're going to be able to get higher prices for all of our goods in the future. So let's hold on to our inventory. So then what happens is the aggregate supply shifts to the left when the expected price levels are going to go up. Okay, it's going to shift up to the left. So anyway, that's what you needed to know about that one. Now we did a problem with this. This is really simple. Just the idea that because of inflation, you could either, and if it doesn't do what is expected, then it can either benefit the lender or the borrower. So if you think about, let me jump over here to my formula if I can find it in here somewhere. I'm sure it's in here, one of these. If not, I will put it in here. Let's see. Okay. Okay, well, all right, so let's just say the real interest rate, real interest equals, can't spell, but I'll fix that. Jump over here to equals the nominal interest minus the inflation rate. Okay, so now if we look at that and we say, oh, okay, so whoops, sorry about that. If we start off with a loan and we say that the lender wants to earn 5%, okay, wants to earn 5% real interest. So 5% is going to equal, and let's say that they say the expected inflation rate is going to be 2%. So they're going to charge 7%. 7% nominal, right? So they'll charge 7% on the loan because over the time of the loan, all the price levels are going to go up 2%. So once the money's paid back, it'll be 2% less valuable than it was when it was lent, when it was borrowed. So the lender's going to want to be compensated right here for the inflation rate. Okay. Now, if the inflation rate is lower than expected, if it ends up only being 1%, then the real interest rate for the lender ends up being higher. The lender ends up getting 6% real interest if the expected interest is lower. If the actual inflation rate is lower than the expected inflation. So that benefits the lender. So if the actual inflation rate is lower than expected, it benefits the lender because the real interest ends up being higher. But let's say that it's 3%, which is an actual inflation rate higher than expected. Then the real interest rate is only 4%, so the lender ends up only paying 4% real interest. So if the actual inflation rate right here is higher than the expected, then that benefits the borrower, okay? So if you understand that, you'll be able to answer any of the questions on the quiz. Okay, now, there's a really good, this is in your book, but there's some really good Khan Academy videos on demand pull inflation and cost of push inflation. Demand pull inflation is anything that's going to pull the aggregate demand curve to the right, okay? So if we had a decrease in the real interest rate, that's going to mean that borrowing money to invest is less expensive because the real interest rate is lower. So that's going to mean that a domestic investment goes up, which if we look back at our function or at our equation, that is a part of the aggregate demand. Whoops, I went too far or something. Where am I here? Right here. So if we lower the real interest rate, we're going to get more investment because people typically borrow the money, the companies borrow the money that they invest. So when the investment goes up, aggregate demand is going to go up, and that's going to shift the aggregate demand to the right, which if it shifts out, that's going to raise price levels, which we call demand pull. See, because the price levels are up here now, so we call that demand pull inflation. Okay, so demand pull inflation looks like the aggregate demand curve is shifting out to the right. Okay. And typically that's going to happen if we're operating at a potential. If we're already here, if we're already at a potential and we do something to push the aggregate, to push the aggregate demand farther to the right past the potential, that's when we start talking about demand pull inflation. Okay, so we're out to the right and higher prices than where we are at a potential. Okay. All right. Know how to calculate the unemployment rate. We've already talked about that, so that's not hard. Understand the relationship between the natural rate of unemployment and the long run aggregate supply. And that is what I was talking about earlier when I said that when you look at these two models, this point right here at a potential GDP is also known as the point where we're at full employment, also known as the point, where we are at the natural rate of, down here, the natural rate of unemployment right here. So that point on the Phillips curve, this point right here on the Phillips curve, where the long run Phillips curve is synonymous or the same in terms of employment as this point up here on the aggregate demand and supply right here at a potential, or where the long run aggregate supply is. Okay, that's either we sometimes call that full employment, and we sometimes call that the natural level of unemployment, but it's the same thing, the natural level of unemployment. Yeah. Okay. Now, cost push inflation is simply it's when price levels go up because the aggregate supply pushes or shifts up to the left. So it's the cost, so it's the cost. So we also know that the aggregate supply is also the marginal cost curve. So when we do anything to shift the aggregate supply curve, so if we're here, if we're operating here in the economy, and we're right there, if we have the aggregate supply shift up from here, we're going to get price levels above where they would be at our potential, but it's not going, but it's because the aggregate supply curve is shifting to the left, and we call that cost push inflation. Okay, and once again, there's a real good video that explains that really well. Okay. Now we need to understand that a shift in the aggregate demand curve would cause a movement along the short run Phillips curve. Okay, so let me read through this, and then I'll just explain it on the graph. When exports decrease, net exports decrease, shifts left, real output decreases, price levels decrease, so there would be a movement down, right? Okay, so what we need to understand is that the price levels on the aggregate demand supply are here, or on the vertical axis, right? And we call that price level, okay? But it's really the same thing as the inflation rate, the rate of inflation here. When we have a higher rate of inflation, what we're actually saying is price levels over the whole economy are going up. So anything that would cause the aggregate demand curve to shift to the right, which would cause price levels to go up, would cause a movement up and along the line, right, on the Phillips curve, okay? Because we're going, when we go on the Phillips curve from point A to point B, we get less unemployment. So that means more employment. And when we go from here to here, we get higher price levels and we get higher output, which means more employment. So more employment on this graph looks like less unemployment on this graph. So that's what happens. Now this movement also, now what would happen here obviously is if you had anything that would shift the aggregate demand to the right, you would have a movement up and along the short run aggregate supply. So the movement would be along the short run aggregate supply here, but at the same time you would get a movement up this way on the short run of Phillips curve, because this is showing more employment, less unemployment, right? Because this is more unemployment as we go out that way, right? So it's kind of like the opposite, but it's the same, okay? I mean, it's the same thing. It's just, you're going, when you want it on this graph, as you have more and more employment, you're moving from right to left because you're lowering unemployment. And then here, as you get more and more employment, you're going left to right, okay? So that's what you need to know. Okay, we're almost done. Okay, so this is just knowing that what you're going to see on the quiz is a table, and you're going to see numbers. You're going to see dollar amounts for real GDP, and you're going to see dollar amounts for nominal GDP, right? And the real GDP is based on measuring the output at a standardized price. So the price levels are the same from year to year to year when we're measuring real GDP. We're just looking at whether the actual output goes up or down. So if we look at nominal and real in the same year, and the nominal GDP has gone up more than the real, well, then the nominal GDP is based on the output and that year's prices. So if the nominal GDP increases more, it means price levels have gone up, not necessarily output, or the price levels have gone up more than output has. So when you see a higher increase in nominal GDP than you see in real GDP for the same year, you know that there was inflation, because the only way the nominal GDP can be higher than the real is if price levels are higher. Okay. Okay. And then this one is just a review. Okay. This is just a review, and you just need to know that when we think about a production possibilities curve, the concepts that we're looking at is choice, scarcity, and opportunity cost. So if we look at a curve over here, I've got one in here somewhere, I'm sure. Not there. Maybe it's at the beginning. Let me go back. Okay, let me go back. Let me see if I can find it real quick. Maybe I don't. I thought I did. Okay, well, you know what? Easy enough. Let me just jump over here. Okay. So if we look here, we know that this curve is showing that as we move down, the opportunity cost to, in this case, have more capital goods. If I can blow it up a little bit, let me just see. Yeah, if we have more capital goods, it's going to cost more in a consumer. So you have increasing opportunity cost because we can only produce out to here. That tells us that resources are limited, so that's scarcity. And the other one was choice, right? This model is showing us that we have a choice here between using our resources for a consumer goods or a capital goods. What this does not show is a price levels. This doesn't really model price levels, but it does model the concepts of choice, scarcity, and opportunity cost. I'll let you look this one up. There's also a really good video, video on how to compute the consumer price index. Let me just jump over here to your course and go here. these are really good. And let's see. Right here. So this video calculating a CPI and inflation will be all you need to know, and it's also in the book. And when this is also in the book, the causes of hyperinflation, and you need to really understand assignment 5, problem 1. And I think you probably need to understand all of them. I think the last quiz, a question that you get 20 points for. Let me pull up the assignment. I'm pretty sure I did a combination of all of these. So make sure you understand, all these problems. And if you do, then you won't have any problem at all with the because they're all very similar. Yeah. Let's see that one's, and let's see that one's. Only worry about problem 1 and 3. This is not. This is a review one that you need to know for the assignment, but the quiz question is very similar to problem 1 and 3. Okay. And that's pretty much it. Do you have any questions?
Can we go back to the difference between the short run and long run Phillips curve?
Yeah, okay. Well, the simple answer is that one is a downward sloping and one is vertical. Okay. But the longer answer is that what it's saying is, if I can find it down here. Here's what I was looking for before. All right. Man. So one of your problems really gets into this, this expected inflation. So you shouldn't have any problem with that, those on the quiz at all. What this is saying is that in the long run, just like the argument, and we haven't really gotten to the chapter on classical theories, but the classical theory is that in the long run, everything always comes back to the potential, and in the long run, everything's going to come back to the natural rate. Let me jump down here to the natural rate of unemployment, and why is because price levels or the inflation rate is going to adjust so that if we have too much employment, a wage rate, the theory is that the wage rates are going to fall to a point where everyone who wants a job has a job. That's the theory. Now, I'm not sure if that's actually how it works in real life, but that's the theory. That in the long run, the economy is going to adjust. So that the actual relationship between the inflation rate and the unemployment rate is that it's perfectly inelastic. In other words, no matter what the price levels are, the natural rate of unemployment is always going to be right here. Right, which again is typically, depending on who you ask, could be anywhere between 3 and 5%. That's what typically is seen as the natural rate of. Now when you look at the different causes of unemployment, frictional is one, and that frictional is what is the natural rate, because there's always a certain amount of people who are in between jobs. They're not really, they're short-term unemployed. They're changing jobs, they're moving, or whatever. Okay? Okay. Does that help you any? Yes. In this problem that we did, we had a shift. And I can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember why it shifted, but we did a problem with this. Let me think about this a second. This would shift, which would mean that at every level, like when you think about a shift from here to here, you're saying that at the same price level, you have more employment. So you just have to think about what would cause you to have less inflation at every level of employment. And I think that was because I don't remember. You know what? I'd have to go back and look at it. One of the things, this can get confusing because you got all these graphs and they're related, but it gets confusing because you have to, you really need to know what the cause and effect, and sometimes it's not so clear whether the cause and effect goes one way or the other way. So that's why this can get confusing. So,
okay.
I think that you're fine though. I mean, I think you'll be fine with the quiz though, with what you know. And I know this shifted, and I just have to go back and look at it. I cannot remember why it shifted right now. But I do know that what a shift means. It means that if you think about this as shifting, you're saying that at every a price level, like here, you've got more employment. So it means that price levels went down, and and unemployment didn't go up, and for whatever reason. And I have to go back and look at it. So anyway, I'm going to stop the recording. I think I'm going to stop it right here, right?